Welcome to the world of scale modeling with Mike Ashe, where techniques, tips, and creativity come alive with dozens of tutorials, projects, tape-up reviews, and picture references to help you build better scale models and enjoy our wonderful hobby.
Hey everybody, and a happy new year. It is now 2023, and for our first YouTube video for this new year, we're going to do a tape-up review of the brand new HK 148 scale B-25J. It's been almost 40 years since a company put out a brand new kit like this, and I gotta tell you, it's a winner. The instructions are first rate, and it's almost like looking at photographs. The kit itself is well engineered, and the fit is just outstanding. The fit of the wings to the fuselage, the fit of the tail to the fuselage, the clear parts, everything fits perfectly. And what we're going to do is I'm going to start off with giving you some tips on construction of this kit, as well as some upgrades that'll really make this a showstopper, and then we'll go through the tape-up. So let's get started.
Before we get started with the actual tape-up, I do want to go over some of the sub-assemblies with you, and two things that I think will greatly enhance the appearance of the model. First one is all the 50 caliber machine guns are pre-drilled and have separate barrels, and the fit is perfect. The problem you're going to have is that there's two tiny stubs which hold each barrel to the tree, and there's a good chance you're going to mar. So what I recommend that you do is buy a set of the Masters 2-part 148 scale brass barrels. I usually get the packs for the B-17s because you get a lot of barrels for your money, and then you have to slightly enlarge this hole to go from 0.035 to 0.040, and I recommend you use two intermediate drill bits to do that, 0.037 and 0.039, so that you don't skew that hole. And if you go slow and step it up like I recommend with various size bits, this will fit right in place perfectly, and it is perfectly centered, and it looks pretty good. It's a much better improvement over this one. Okay, the second thing with the machine guns is if you decide to put the gun packs on the sides of the fuselage, the 50 caliber machine guns for Masters fit right in the holes without having to do any additional drilling. They're perfect. So that's the first enhancement. The second one we'll talk about are the engines, but before we do that, just like on the old monogram kit, you have to pre-drill two holes on the back here. And what I recommend you do is after you drill these holes, and you have to drill them out to 0.043. Once you do that, hold the gun packs tightly against the side of the fuselage and just put 2 drops of super glue on the inside of the holes where the pins are exposed, and that'll give you a nice tight fit. A couple notes on the fuselage. To get a better fit of the wings, there's a slight raised indentation here. Just go ahead and scrape that off. And to get a better fit of the forward fuselage piece, there's some burrs on the inside of this cup here where this piece sits on it. So you got to take the edge of a number 11 X-Acto blades and carefully scrape this smooth. And there was a little bit of flash on this part. The other thing I've noticed on all the HK kits, and I think I call them breakaway trees. You get these little raised areas here. You can see here. They're all along the inside of the fuselage. So on all of the gluing surfaces. It wasn't on the wings, but it was definitely on the fuselages. So what you have to do is carefully scrape these off, and there's multiple connection points for positioning, which is really nice. And of course, there are a lot of reviews of the individual parts on YouTube by now. So there's a lot of nice detail on the inside here. So the other thing I wanted to show you, and we'll go ahead and when we do the tape up, you'll see this. This snap lock system is really cool, and if you glue your wings correctly, when you snap it and push back, there's no seam at all. It is incredible. There's like maybe a 64th of an inch here, and then once you paint that, it'll disappear. So the fit of the wings to the main wings to the fuselage are nice and tight. We'll talk about the flaps here in a little bit. The next thing I want to talk about, let's talk about the other side of the fuselage that I worked on. And it comes with a nice weight that fits right in place. There's a little bit of a seam where it sits on the side of the fuselage, and I recommend you just sand it down, and the interior parts fit quite nicely right on top of it. Like the monogram kit and the Accurate Miniatures kit, you have to install that forward landing gear before you close up the fuselage, so you need to be careful about that. Edward hasn't put out any of their pre-painted cockpit sets for this kit yet, but when they do, you can replace it, and it'll really enhance the cockpit area as Edward does on all of their kits. So that's it for this section, and now let's talk about the landing gear for a sec. The tires are somewhat weighted a little bit. I don't like weighted tires. I don't think they look realistic, but the kit has them. The nice thing is that there's a key on the inside of the tire, and it's keyed to the axle. So the weighted section of the tire is going to sit exactly on the ground, perfectly. The other thing is these landing gear are very nicely done. The tires fit tightly onto the axles, and the landing gear fit tightly inside of their positionings inside the engine cowl areas. The forward landing gear has got a little bit of wiggle to it. It's keyed too, but it's not as keyed as nicely. See, you got a little bit of wiggle here, so you're going to have to be careful when you glue that in place. Okay, the bomb bay consists of several parts, and what I did, at least for the tape up, is I assembled it in halves so that I can pull them apart and paint them and detail them, but they do snap together quite nicely, and here you go. So this part fits together nicely too, and there's a lot of nice detail on the inside, and once I close up the fuselage with some tape, we'll take a look at it. But it's multi-dimensional, and of course, like on the other kits, the monogram kit and the Accurate Miniatures kit, you're going to have to glue the bombs in place, otherwise you're never going to be able to get them in there after you close this separate sub-assembly up. All right, let's talk about the control surfaces. The rudders fit, they're separate rudders, and they fit nice and tight, just like that. Both of them are nice and tight, and there'll be a nice touch to the appearance of the model if you turn them just a little bit. I had to cut these out on the old monogram kit on the recent build that I did, and now you don't have to do that anymore. So the seams are tight, all the parts fit together quite nicely. There's a little bit of play on the elevators, so what I recommend you do is use white glue to attach them after all the parts are painted. And again, on my monogram build, I had to carefully cut these out and clean them up, fix them, and then glue them back in place. You don't have to do that with this kit. Very nice touch. All right, let's talk about the wings and the separate flaps and the engine cowling. The engine cowling fits together quite nicely. What I recommend you do, and I do this on all my kits wherever I can, is I reinforce all of the seams from the inside so that I never have to worry about any cracking when I'm working on the seams on the outside. So seams, it closes up quite nicely. So I would not put any glue here or here because that's where the landing gear doors close up. The fit of this engine cowling onto the wing is just exceptional. It's both sides are level with the wing, and all you have to do is just, after you prime it, just put a tiny bead of white glue here and then clean it up with a damp Q-tip and you're done. Whereas on a monogram kit, you had to do a lot of filling with white glue, with super glue, and then sanding and shaping. There a little bit of confusion. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 parts here for the interior areas where the flaps are, if you're going to have the flaps down, which I think most people will. Here's what I recommend you do. There's an interior part that shows, let me see if I can get it in there. Yeah, right there you can see some of the interior ribbing. That part and that part goes in first, and then the actuator mechanism for the flap, glue that in place, and be careful how you go in place. It sits flat on the inside area of this rib part. And then these pieces, and it took me a while to figure this out, I actually found a photo from a derelict B-25 that I had taken from the underside because the flaps were down. This piece sits flat against the side of the wing, as does this one. So that's how this goes in place. And then here, let me get this. This piece, this outside flap gets attached just like this, and then the inside flap goes just like this, and there's a little hole on the inside of the fuselage for that pin. So you can position them in just about any angle open, which is a really nice touch. The wings fit together quite nicely. There are multiple alignment pinpoints inside here. I think I counted 10. On this kit, I used more Kester's red tube glue than I have in years. And I put a little bit of glue on each one of the pin openings for the alignment pins, and then just pressed everything together and put some tape on it, and that's all I had to do. There are separate pieces for the air inlets for the engines, and they fit quite nicely in place. They pop in place. On a monogram kit, starboard wing looks like this. For some reason, the port wing, they reversed the mold. There's just a hole here, which looks really odd. And I didn't notice it until my third build when I realized that they reversed the hole. It should look like this, not just a hole in the wing. There's also a separate light piece here, and I'll show you how well the clear parts fit over the wings and onto the fuselage. So let's talk about, nope, it goes here. All right, let's talk about the engines. The engines look okay. I'm sure Edward will have a wiring set for them. However, what I recommend you do is replace these engines with Resin 2 Details 3D printed R2600 engines. They fit perfectly inside the cowlings. So on these resin ones, just glue a plastic disc on the inside of here, and then you'll probably have to modify this pinhole a little bit by cutting it down, but everything should fit in place. Here's the other thing that I like about this kit. All of the engine actuator flaps are set in the open position, just like on the real aircraft for engine startup, and all of the actuators are in place and aligned perfectly. You have to be very careful. These actuators are very delicate and they'll pop off on you. So what I did to protect them was I glued the flaps onto the backing here, and then just put a tiny drop of super glue on each one of the actuators to hold everything in place so that nothing would break on me. And it fits quite nicely onto the engine cowling. And then the engine, which is keyed, sits on here. Where'd it go? There we go. The engine sits on here, and the cowling sits quite nicely on everything. So again, I would replace these engines with these beautiful 3D printed engines from Resin 2 Details. I use these on my B-26 Marauder build, the R2800s, and I used a set of 2600s on my Monogram build. So I highly recommend that you swap out these engines. The last thing I wanted to mention to you is that all the B-25s had armor plating to help to protect pilot and co-pilot. For some reason on this kit, it's a separate part so that you can either put it on or not put it on, because there were some early B-25Js that didn't have this armor plating. There's no positioning tabs for it. So it goes approximately in that location. What I recommend you do to help position it is use one of these rivet lines here and place a piece of labeling tape along here so that this part will sit up against it so that it'll be straight. And then you super glue it, just a tiny drop here and a tiny drop here just to hold it in place. And then you want to hold this part as tightly as you can against the fuselage. And then once it's dry, you run a tiny bead all around the perimeter of it. The other thing is, and it's not in the instructions, I looked for it several times, there's a slight oblong indentation on both of these parts, one for the port wing and one for the starboard wing. And part 58 and part 59 go inside these indentations. Again, they're not in the instructions. So I just wanted to mention that to you. That's the only, if you could call it a disappointment with the kit, but I got to tell you, I think you can put away your Monogram kits and your Accurate Miniatures kits because this kit is absolutely exceptional. I had mentioned earlier that I used more Testors red tube glue than I have in years to put the wings together as well as the control surfaces. However, you're still going to need to deal with the seam lines, and I recommend you use my procedure and my technique of putting a tiny bead of super glue right over the seams and let the capillary action of the super glue seep in between the seams and fill these tiny voids. And then all you have to do is just mild sanding and scraping and you're done. So you're going to have to do that. You don't have to do that on the rudders because they're one piece. But you do have to do it on the forward part of the rudder along this seam line and on the flaps along these seam lines. Even though they fit together tightly, you still get a little bit of these openings here. And on the elevators, the same thing, a little bit of opening and a little bit of opening here. That's real tight, there's nothing you need to do. And on the large elevator, the aft wing section for the elevator, it's so tight you almost don't need to do anything here. And actually, and I should have showed you this earlier, the fit of the elevators, or the fit of the rudders onto the elevator is just incredible. Nice and tight. The one thing I did have to do, let me go ahead and remove this. you have to shave off just a tiny bit, probably a 64th of an inch of plastic off of the forward section here, so that this part will fit nice and tight. So I had to do that on both sides, and let me get it, there we go. And I think just a little bit of, after the parts are primed, you just need to put a little bit of Elmer's glue in here and taper it with a damp Q-tip, and you're done. Absolutely incredible engineering associated with the fit of this kit. So with that, again, we will go ahead and get going on the tape up.
The fit of the main wings to the fuselage using this snap-tight lock system that HK developed is just incredible. It is so tight that the void between the inner edge of the wings and the fuselage is about a 64th of an inch. The engine nacelle attachments to the lower parts of the wings is also pretty tight. The edges of the nacelles are level with the wings. So after a few tiny drops of super glue along those seam lines, all you need to do after you prime it is fill it with Elmer's white glue and contour it with a Q-tip. The trailing edge attachment points to the upper part of the wing are going to need a little bit of work. I recommend you fill those voids with super glue, sand and contour these areas smooth, and then restore the surface detail. The attachment point of the tail to the aft part of the fuselage is pretty tight. The upper and lower attachment points of the rudders to the elevator wing are pretty tight. And as I stated earlier, I think all you need to do here is just, after you prime these areas, fill them with Elmer's glue and then smooth out the seams with a damp Q-tip. The attachment points for the elevator to the lower part of the fuselage are also pretty tight. The Bombay subassembly fits perfectly inside the fuselage, and there's no voids between the sides of the assembly and the inner parts of the fuselage and the forward and aft bulkheads. The lead weight that comes with the kit needs to be sanded down just a tad to get the forward part of the fuselage halves to close up. The aft lower fuselage halves fit together perfectly in a nice tight fit. The upper fuselage halves also have a nice tight fit. The rear gunner's canopy is a perfect fit. The wing light covers on both the port and starboard wings are also a nice tight fit. These clear parts also have a great fit. The cockpit canopy is also a perfect fit. The Bombardier's position canopies are two parts, just like on the Monogram kit and the Accurate Miniatures kit, except on this kit, they're a perfect fit to each other as well as how they sit on the forward part of the fuselage. The engine cowling actuators are a really nice touch for this kit. And the gun packs sit snugly up against the side of the fuselage. There's some flash on some of the openings between the engine cowlings, but you can get in there with the tip of a number 11 X-Acto blade and clean them out. Being able to drop the flaps on this kit will add another level of realism to the model. Here's how that part is supposed to sit, as I mentioned earlier during my building tips. And here's 2 more photos that show how the outer flaps and the inner flaps are dropped. I got my kit from Andy's Hobby headquarters in Glendale, Arizona, and I gotta tell you, when I opened up the box, it was wrapped in some Christmas paper and there was a Christmas card inside. So, a special shout out for Andy, you did a great job.
Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed the video and the tape-up review of this outstanding kit. And with that, Happy New Year, happy scale modeling, and maybe, if we're lucky, we'll see a 1/48 scale B-26 Marauder from HK this year.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a thumbs up. And when you get the chance, visit our website at www.mikeashley.com, where you're going to find dozens of free PDF downloads, including tutorials, picture references, model galleries, projects, and my 5 original scale modeling books. Thanks to Ben Sound and Videvo for the royalty-free music, and happy scale modeling!